It is a huge welcome back to Three Small Chat Rooms. This time around, we want to start talking about some more practical elements. We've previously discussed some of our own internal journeys and challenges along the SPORE path. And we also introduced the idea of readiness. Now what we want to do is talk about how does the conversation start? Like what's next when you do get organisations or people that start asking, what is this about, or what would it look like, or how, where do I start essentially in there? And so we'll probably introduce a number of tools and concepts over the next few sessions. And one of the first ones we're going to talk about is workspace, group space, headspace. I think I got that around the right way. I keep confusing those two. Sorry, everybody. But this is a concept which helps introduce the idea, and then it can be used at lots of levels within an organisation. And I think I'm going to be handing over to Andrew to start that conversation.
Excellent. Thanks, Dave. Look, yes, this is at that point, as you're saying, when organisations first have us in, this is, I guess, a foundational kind of, oh God, I haven't started. I'll edit that bit out. So I might just start again.
You want to start again? I didn't even introduce us, by the way. Sorry, let's start again. I'll introduce us. All right. Hang on. Okay. 3, 2, are you counting me in? Thanks, Matt, who just counted me in.
No worries.
Welcome back, everybody, to Three Small Chat Rooms. I'm Dave from Semiosphere. We have Matt from Risk Diversity and Andrew from Clarity Enabled. And this time around, we want to extend on our theme of readiness, which we discussed in the last session, focusing on that idea of what happens when organisations, or where do you start when organisations are interested and they want to start exploring social psychology of risk and some of the ideas behind it, because you've got to be able to make that link, or you've got to start the scaffolding process. So we're going to be talking about one of the tools, Workspace, Headspace, Group Space, which is a tool that used to lots of levels in social psychology of risk and within organisations. And I'm going to be handing over to Andrew, who's going to start that conversation.
Thanks, Dave. Look, yes, when organisations are ready to start trying to tackle a complex area of people, risk and culture, one of the foundational concepts we introduce, and it's a really important one, as you said, is this workspace, headspace, group space. It's a concept, well, the basic concept, yes, we are looking, from my experience, I've worked a lot with organisations and safety management systems, and when we look at the output of that, hazard assessments, SWIMs, risk registers, very typically, as they should do, it's really found important. They focus on some of those, the typical, what we call the workspace hazards, electrocution, fall from heights, all of that kind of stuff that's really important. And this concept is really, workspace, headspace, group space, does start to provide a means for organisations to start getting their heads around how do we understand that people risk culture side. That's also critical in safety. So what are those, by headspace, what are those, some of those psychological hazards, or by group space, cultural organisational hazards that also affect how work is performed? And if we, practical example, yes, someone's on a forklift, we can look at all those physical hazards, but they're still making decisions all day that are creating hazards as well. And this is a really foundational tool. It's a tool that I personally really like applying with organisations, because I find people at all levels really get it, even operational level, probably they're the ones who get it the most. It does really start to provide some clarity and a visual means of saying, well, yes, there are all of those other hazards there. And I might hand over to Matt to talk about, well, he's got some icons behind him and some of the tools he's used to take that a little bit further.
Thanks, Andy. Look, workspace, headspace, group space, it's a foundational tool, and it's a great way to open up the conversation inside any organisation. So in practical terms, when we go in, this is the first tool that we actually introduce people to in the social psychology of risk. So it's fascinating. We go in, generally conduct a word audit. So we find out, when people think of safety, what is available to them unconsciously when they think of safety. So we want to record what essentially is unconscious in their brain, get it out on paper and have a discussion around it. So the workspace side of things, I'm just checking my list here of what usually comes up. We talk about pay, overtime, equipment, PPE, vehicles, phones, the facilities, hygiene, discipline, job security, safety systems, lots of safety systems, risk, consequences, risk matrices, all those special things, barbecues, the special days that we had, like just gone for April 28th, the International Day of Safety. Not that we don't need to be safe for the other 364, but look, these are really, really, it's a well-trodden path. We've got lots of systems already around here based upon that. I think that we in sport, I know we in sport accept these systems and that you've got to have them. This is the primary way that we take care of people. But there is other levels as well. So when we talk about headspace, these are things that we start getting into areas where people actually haven't had to think about. So trust and power inside the organisation, how people perceive that. Job satisfaction, belonging, encouragement, caring, positivity, adult thinking, creativity, success. These are concepts that can be centred on an individual that aren't really covered all that well. And a lot of organisations have trouble expressing this inside their systems and how they approach risk.
Can I add something there, Matt, too? I mean, from my experience, what I see is you're exactly right. It doesn't get picked up in safety systems and risk assessments. People will communicate these issues to you, though, if you learn how to listen. And that's part of what we extend out of this as well, isn't it? That sometimes, you know, unfortunately, it's when we've had a serious incident sometimes that then, yes, if you have the right conversational skills, people will start to articulate these headspace, group space hazards that have affected the work they've performed. And that's sometimes a discussion point with some of the organisations I work with too, is to say, look, there's a disconnect here. It's not just not in your safety system, these higher level, you know, the headspace, group space hazards. It's not in most organisations' safety systems. But if you look at some of the coronial inquests like Dreamworld, or I'll put some links to some of these. R versus Watts is about a serious crane rollover in Canberra, for example. All those headspace, group space issues are being discussed at that point. And I guess for some of the, we're trying to bring some of that forward, aren't we? To say, no, you need this up front in your, if you've got, yes, systems are still important, safety systems, but you need to bring some of the consideration of these headspace, group space hazards, not after something's happened, but up front, so you can plan for it. Start.
Guys, do you find that by kind of using a model, like obviously, you know, there's a lot of complexity to this, and one of the ways it's rolled out is by using some artifacts and some models that you're kind of showing something that people are used to seeing, like a matrix, like it's not a matrix, but a framework, and people go, oh, I'm used to this. And then you start asking these questions, and suddenly you've got them talking about trust and care and culture, and
100%. And
kind of like they go, oh yeah, like I see, they know it's there, but it gives them a framework for it. I think that's the important thing.
I think that's the whole value out of it. It gives them a framework for bringing some of this forward and articulating it, discussing it in a business. It is a tool that, you know, concept people get quite quickly, and it is supported by, I mean, there's a number of tools, some IQ cards that people can take away and use, and even that we've got an engagement board methodology where fantastic at surfacing some in any workplace, you know, those headspace, group space issues are there. We can't separate that out from the way we work, but particularly that engagement board, which is and the way that's applied is developed by Dr. Rob Long of Human Dimensions. Fantastic tool. It surfaces all those, as Matt said, those unconscious issues and those group space cultural issues that are there. They're going to affect the way we work. They're really serious. And yeah, that, I guess, to me, Dave, that's the whole value of, here's a concept, but here's some tools that your team, that we typically find people can apply really well in the workplace. And it's taking it a lot further than, you know, your typical kind of toolbox or something where you're trying to get a little bit of engagement on these issues.
I think the key word that you hit on there, Andrew, is conversation. So we need people to be able to be having a conversation your typical risk assessment does not elicit a great conversation. Lots of head nodding, arms crossed or hands in pockets, and get on with the job.
Look, Matt, I've had the experience on, I'll give you one recent example. Just working with an organisation in the construction space, getting their risk assessments ready for a major project. When you start to talk to them about some of this, they're starting to see that, yes, their kind of draft project risk assessment, it's all those workspace issues, which, electrocution, falls from heights, pressure, sound, noise, all of those things that are absolutely foundational and important, but it's just, there's a big gap. There's none of that cultural side, organizational side, psychological hazard side at all. And, this stuff is, not to be dramatic, it's right there, involved in serious incidents.
And let's just skip to group space, and let's talk about this, and then reference back to your risk assessment that we're discussing. So we look at collective mindfulness, team membership, practical management, meaning and purpose, organisational belonging, meaning, purpose, trust, affirmation, performance development, policies, punishment, flexibility, ethics. These are all group space issues. When we come down to a risk assessment, there's not a tool inside that device to these conversations.
Yes.
So
I'll give you a practical example too, Matt, and I would refer people, if you're interested too. I mentioned that R versus Watts. There was a crane rollover in Canberra is a really good example, sadly, very sad outcomes. The crane driver, one of the people supporting the load was killed, which is an awful outcome. But, very clearly, I'll give people reference to that, but very clearly in there, yes, there's the kind of physical hazard issues, but there's a whole lot of operational pressure and got to get the job done. This needs to be done for tomorrow. There's all those headspace, group space issues just clearly articulated in that. And what was interesting is, the driver was one of the people who were prosecuted, but there's also a whole lot of other people who were saying, no, this job needs to be done right now, late at night, even though it's getting dark. He wasn't, even to the point where, the crane had lifted off the ground a little bit once, and they still continued the job. So and that's even just one example there. I did discuss that with a group in construction recently, and a lot of people were anchored back in workspace were saying, well, the drivers should have just said no. But this operational pressure, to sometimes the fixation on getting the job done, even though it's clear to a whole range of people there that, hang on, this is really risky. They continued, really does, highlight just how integral, and, we can't separate ourselves out from those headspace, group space issues.
I think I'm just wary of time, boys. So I'm just gonna try and sort of cut us off. I think too, if we look in hindsight, just picking those conversations that both of you just shared, in hindsight, after something goes wrong, these are all the things that get picked up. Like, it's really easy to say there was no barriers, but there's always commentary about pressures and culture and that sort of just the thing, all that stuff, trust, care, whatever it might be. They should have spoken up. Yeah, why didn't he? That's the question that gets asked afterwards. So if the idea of assessing risk, which is all about risk, right? The idea of looking at risk beforehand. Our challenge is, at the moment, the orthodox approach anchors us to the workspace. It anchors us to physical hazards. We can talk about the other stuff, but we don't have a very good box or framework or context. And what something like Headspace, Workspace, Group Space does is gives organisations that context. It allows them to surface in a more meaningful way stuff like, hang on, what are the other dynamics? Okay, there's massive pressure to get this job done tonight. Let's actually have a proper conversation about that and surface it. And then suddenly everyone's like, actually, you're right, this does not feel right. It's not a magic solution. It's not a solution. It's just another framework, right? But it provides this link between how do we talk about these broad ideas of social psychology of risk. We understand there's a lot of psychology in social psych, but how do we actually implement it? And I think that's sort of hopefully what we're trying to get across here is there's other tools, but this is one way of introducing that conversation in there. So I think we might need to call it there. Obviously, there's a big area to this, and this tool can be used in lots of different ways, and there are lots of other models that hang off the back of it from there, I think. Is that sort of about fair enough, boys? I don't know if without sort of keeping to go, what do you reckon?
Yeah, no, that's spot on.
Good.
All right, cool. Thanks, everybody, for hanging in there. And next week, we're just going to continue conversations around some of these other tools that are available. And so how do you surface this stuff, and how do you have conversations in organizations and introduce some of these ideas? So thanks, everybody. Catch you next time.
Thanks, Dave.